Hello and welcome to the Deception Tips podcast, where you will learn amazing cues to detect deceit that will help you read people like never before. I'm your host, Spencer Kaufman. Let's get started.
Welcome to episode 41 of the Deception Tips podcast. I'm really thrilled that you guys are continuing to listen to this podcast, that you guys are motivated to learn more about body language, detecting deception, and reading people, so that you will know what everybody is saying, what every body is saying, as in body language. Not only just everybody, but yes, what every body is actually saying with those hidden signs of body language and deception, because the truth is written all over not only our faces, but also our entire bodies. So I'm thrilled again that you guys are continuing to listen to this podcast and learn more about detecting deception and reading people. And you know what? I'd be really thrilled if you guys would share this or leave a review somewhere on iTunes or wherever you're listening, whether it's iHeartRadio, anywhere, just to get the word out so that we can get more people learning about body language and detecting deception. Because with anything, the more you talk about it, the more you hear it, the more repetition that you have, the better off you are going to be at recognizing these signs of deception and body language. So thanks again for continuing to listen. I really hope you can help me out with a share or a like or a follow, whatever the case may be. But anyway, you're not listening to hear me talk about helping me promote this. You're listening because you want to learn more about body language and detecting deception. Now, last time, we talked about how confident people tend to spread out more. They take up more space. Whereas liars, they take up less space. Now, this is evidenced many times, and there are many different behaviors that go with this. So let's put together some of those clusters of behaviors in sort of a little bit of a recap with what we talked about last week. Number one, liars, they tend to sometimes can maybe even fold their arms, which would be taking up less space. This was talked about way back in episode number 1. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. That was episode number 1, folding arms. That's an example of taking up less space. Now, it also happens in other things we've talked about with less space. Things like crossing the legs and tucking them backwards. That is a taking up less space. Another one is stepping backwards. That was episode 29, where they kind of step backwards and almost like ward off the accusation. Sometimes they can put their hands up, which would take up a little bit more space, but other times they usually step backwards. They might fold their arms, hunch their shoulders, things like that. There are a lot of different things. Now, I'm going to back up 1 second when I said that they may put their legs and cross them. Oftentimes they tuck them back under their chair and lock their ankles. Now that was episode 22. So all of these things are kind of a concealing behavior, or where they shrink to take up less space. They might fold their arms, they might lock their ankles underneath their chair, they might tuck them back, they might hunch over. If they're standing, they may step backward. All of that is done to take up less space. That is a big cluster or a pattern of behavior. And as I've said many, many times before, it is so very important that you look for patterns and clusters of behavior, because it is only through seeing patterns and clusters that you can be certain, now I mean certain, that someone is being deceptive or telling a lie or something. Now, you're not going to know exactly what they are lying about, but you will know that they are not telling the truth, because where there is smoke, there is fire. If there are a lot of signs of smoke, you can be sure there is fire. And that is what a pattern or a cluster of behavior is. 1 or 2 things, who knows? It's a suspicion. You have 4 or 5, now you know something is going on. With that, we continue to how they are taking up less space. Why do they take up less space? Because it's a very simple reason of, if there is less of their body for you to see and observe, then it'll be less signs of leakage that they will display. So that is why they take up less space when they are trying to get away with a lie. So in and of itself, the act of them covering up their lie or trying to prevent those signs of body language from coming out actually is a sign of deception in and of itself. All right, so with that, let's move on to today. Today we are going to talk about a sign of deception that is on the face. This sign is most typically displayed in men. However, women can do it as well, and they have almost their own variation of it. So, we're going to talk about a sign that is kind of touching the nose. Now, you may say, oh, touching the nose, what is that? Well, this is something that happens a lot when people tell lies, and it is something that a lot of people may not really know about. They don't really see as a lie because it is a natural behavior and it happens all the time. Well, remember that people tell lies all the time. Some estimates say that people tell about 50 lies a day. Others say hundreds of lies a day. Others say about 1 or 2 lies in every 10 minutes of conversation. So people are lying like crazy all the time. And with that, this is deception tip number 41. Liars may touch the bottom of their nose with one finger, usually the index, in a side-to-side motion. Here it is again, deception tip 41. Liars may touch the bottom of their nose with one finger, usually the index, in a side-to-side motion. So here we go. Let's break this down real quick before we go to a break. Liars may touch the bottom of their nose. Now, this is like the bottom of the nose. It's not the sides where your nostrils meet, or it's not the top of the nose. It is the bottom of the nose, kind of the bridge of the nose between the two nostrils, where there's that little flap of skin right there. They touch that. Now, usually the only way people really touch it when they're lying is with a finger, and it's usually the index finger because they're using it in some form, and they go side to side. It's almost like they're brushing their teeth, but they're actually brushing the bottom of their nose. It's that type of visual. It's side to side, and it's more of like a swooping. It could be done, usually when it's a deceptive gesture, it's done back and forth. So like one time, down, back, and that is it. Sometimes when people have their nose that itches, they maybe use like their whole hand, almost like a karate chop, and they'll go back and forth like rapidly, like boom, 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 boom. Or one finger back and forth. That's just an itch. But if it happens like a couple times where it's just back and forth, then it could be a potential deceptive behavior. So we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. We're going to explain why it happens and the reasoning behind it and what's going on why it happens with men more than women. All of that coming up right after this.
Want to be a lie spotter but don't have time to do the research? Check out Spencer Kaufman's Deception Tips blog and learn how to detect deception. You'll be an expert at detecting lies. That's SpencerKaufman.com.
All right, here we are. We're talking about liars and the behaviors they express when lying. This is deception tip number 41 on how liars may touch the bottoms of their nose. So keep listening. We got a lot in store, and I encourage you to listen over and over again to really learn what is going on. So we mentioned how there are a couple of different things within this deception tip. Liars may touch the bottom of their nose. That's this flap of skin between the two nostrils. Then they usually use one finger, usually the index finger, and it is in a side-to-side motion. There are a couple of variations of this behavior that may not necessarily mean people are being deceptive. The first one is when it is done rapidly, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, kind of as an itch. They're scratching an itch on their nose. The second is when they would use like their thumb and index finger, usually where the fingerprint is on the finger, so it's the pads of the finger, and they just kind of touch both sides of their nose. This is usually done where they come from the top of the nostrils and go down, touching the bridge of their nose. That is more of like an itch again, or maybe their nose is running, something like that. Another thing people could do is use like their sleeve or the palm of their hand, and they go up. That's usually like a wiping nose gesture. That's nothing really. It's not a deceptive behavior. However, it could be, but it's typically, that is something else. So those are some variations to watch for that may not mean someone is being deceptive. The red flag with nose gestures on being deceptive is the index finger or a finger in a side-to-side motion, back, forth, where they hit the bottom bridge of the nose and go back and forth. This is due to a sensitive tissue that is on the bottom of the nose. Now, this is in both men and women. However, with men, that tissue there is a little bit more sensitive. Don't ask why, it's just how the biology is. It's more of an erectile tissue down there that is sensitive, so that when men are lying, it will start to kind of tingle, itch. They go like that, they adjust their nose, kind of whatever, with scratch that itch per se. Women have it as well. They have that itch there too. When they start to lie, it starts to tingle. It's almost like another type of nose gesture when lying, and it's called the Pinocchio effect. Like how Pinocchio, when he would lie, his nose would grow. In humans, when we lie, we have that tissue in our nose, and it starts to kind of turn red. Instead of the Pinocchio effect, it should really be called the Rudolph effect, because it's Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. When humans lie, because we have all of that sensitive tissue in our nose, that it starts to kind of turn red on the tip of our nose, so that should be called the Rudolph effect. We are effectively renaming it right now. It is no longer Pinocchio effect. It is now Rudolph effect. Copyright Spencer Kaufman. Anyway, the tissue on the bottom of the nose, that's what we're talking about today. In a side-to-side motion, men have a more sensitive tissue there than women. Women, they still do this behavior, so it is something to watch out for with both males and females. Another variation that you can see, and we've talked about this one before, is how there is some sensitive tissue on the back of the neck, where when people lie, they tend to reach a hand back there and massage their neck, or just even grab their neck, kind of. One arm, one hand, it's the back of the neck. That one we talked about when we talked about the tense neck. I mentioned it a little bit in episode 38, but it's mainly where they massage away the tension on the back of their neck. They put a hand to the back of the neck, massage away that tension. We'll talk about that more in a future episode, but for now, it is similar in that it is sensitive tissue. There's sensitive tissue on the back of the neck. Everyone likes a good neck massage. Sensitive tissue on the bottom of the nose that when people lie, they may itch and rub. Now, with that, you should always be looking for some patterns and clusters of behavior, because someone itching their nose doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. It could mean anything. Maybe their nose itches. Maybe they have a cold. Maybe they're stuffed up. Maybe they smelled something that made their nose run. Maybe there's some onions or some pepper. Maybe they're trying to stifle a sneeze. You see that in cartoons and movies all the time where people are about to sneeze, and then someone puts their finger right under the bridge of their nose, and for some reason it stops them from sneezing, and they're like, oh, thanks. And then, achoo, they sneeze right away. So obviously it didn't really work. It's just something kind of the cartoon artist did for a humorous thing to put in the cartoon or to lengthen it or who knows what. But anyway, you'll see that. So there could be a variety of reasons that people may be putting a finger underneath their nose. Typically, you can see people make fun of that Hitler mustache where they put their finger under their nose like that. So that could be done. Maybe they're just having a laugh. You never know from any one behavior that it means someone is being deceptive or that they are lying. This is why, again, it is so important that you look for the patterns and clusters of behavior. So look for multiple behaviors. Touching the bottom of a nose, that is done from sensitivity. So look for them touching the bottom of their nose. Look for the nose turning red a little bit. Look for them massaging the back of the neck. Look for those types of behaviors all going together. Typically, when they touch their nose, that is a gesture. It's a hand-to-face gesture, which means you should look for synchronization with their speech. Look for how their other hand movements are. If they're matching their speech patterns, look for that entire pattern of behavior. Because if they're touching their nose, it's a hand-to-face gesture. Look for other gestures. Are they touching their face when you touch their face, as in mirrored movements? We spoke about that a few times ago, not long, so hopefully you remember. It was in episode 35, where usually when you do a gesture, the truthful people would tend to mask those gestures, those mirror movements. Untruthful people or liars are more focused on their lie. They're more focused on telling the lie, so they're not paying attention to those subtle, subliminal, unconscious cues that we would all mirror. It's almost like a yawn. When you yawn, I'm going to yawn, so-and-so is going to yawn, etc. Liars, they may not be doing that because they're so focused on the lie. They aren't focused on or open to the other things that happen around us naturally or unconsciously, because their unconscious is so focused on leaking behaviors to get the truth out so that someone will see through the conscious's lie and the conscious's deception, and the truth will be found. So, remember, continue to look for patterns and clusters of behavior. I want to thank you for listening to the Deception Tips podcast, and I really hope that you'll share it with your friends, subscribe to the feed, check out the Deception Tips videos, the Deception Tips blog, and take a look at the books I have available. And as always, tune in next week for a new Deception Tip.